Thanks, Kaylee, and good to be with you, even in these difficult times. Uh, to answer your question, no, nothing in this region is easy. Uh, Nothing in general in these types of conflicts and situations, not limited to this region, is easy. Uh, but there is reason to believe it may be possible, if difficult, to get to a temporary ceasefire, primarily because it's not in the interest of any of the parties involved uh, to lead to something that would be an all-out war in the region and inevitably pull in Iran as well.
Well, I wonder how close we are to that line. We keep talking about this notion of potentially it becoming a war between Israel and Hezbollah, but when people are already dying by the hundreds, when we're already seeing these kinds of exchanges, the explosions of Hezbollah technology, pagers and walkie-talkies, of course, are we not already there? How should we be defining the activity that's happening?
It's clearly been an escalation, and horrific as it may be to contemplate, it unfortunately can get much, much worse. And one of the key lines would be if Israel launches a ground offensive as well, which there are reports that the Israeli IDF chief of staff has told reservists that have been called up for duty in the north that they need to plan for. So bad as things are, it can absolutely get worse. The one thing I do want to point out to you, Kelly, is how targeted these strikes have been to date in terms of southern Lebanon, even though, as always, unfortunately, there are innocent civilians in the region, in the area, who are directly affected. But the strikes have been targeted strikes, and starting from the most targeted possible, which was Hezbollah pagers and walkie-talkies.
No, that's a very important point, Mara. I appreciate you emphasizing that. We also have to consider that the body, the individuals or the technology being targeted here does belong to an Iranian proxy. So Iran theoretically is playing a role in this as well. To what extent should we believe Iran is directing or advising Hezbollah on its conduct, escalatory or not moving forward from here? And if it is Iran that potentially has the greatest incentive of all to encourage restraint?
So Iran absolutely has an incentive to encourage restraint. I'm not sure that Hezbollah itself is in a position either where their leadership would say this is the opportune time for an all-out assault. And frankly, Israel doesn't have an interest in going to the next level, which is a ground invasion, given that that did not work out well for them in the past, even at the same time that it decimated southern Lebanon. But it ultimately, in the 1980s, for Israel, led to the growth of the Hezbollah that they confront today. So it's a complicated situation. No entity, as I said, has a real interest in escalation. But because of the relationships back and forth, and because of the interest in all of deterring the other's actions, we could end up there. And this is why the United States and other leaders in the region and throughout the world are working hard to de-escalate.
Well, and working hard still at a ceasefire between Israel and another proxy, Hamas. We have heard Israel say its end goal with this action in the north is to be able to return the Israelis from the north who have been displaced back to their homes. Hezbollah says if you want to do that, if you want the strikes on the north to stop, you need to end the war in Gaza. Is that really the linchpin to all of this? If a ceasefire agreement could be reached to end the fighting in Gaza, is that a credible solution to these other problems?
So I am a strong believer that these are all interlinked. Whether one solves or resolves another, harder to say. But to me, it's very clear that reaching a ceasefire in Gaza between Hamas and Israel, getting the hostages out, getting more humanitarian aid in, starting to plan for a day after, which frankly should have been going on already in terms of innocent civilians in Gaza, and frankly, Palestinians in the West Bank as well that are being increasingly affected by this, having a way forward. All of those things will help make more credible give more tools to get to a ceasefire as well with Hezbollah. That's not to say that you shouldn't at the same time be trying for a temporary ceasefire with Hezbollah, given the increase in actions there. But in general, reducing tensions throughout the region is critical, and the steps forward that the United States laid out, frankly, back in June for a three-stage ceasefire with Hamas would absolutely be a huge help.
Well, and Mara, it's incredible to consider that this conflict, this war with Hamas, has now been ongoing for almost a full year. We are approaching less than 2 weeks from now, 1 year since the October 7th attack on Israel. Are you concerned, given what we're seeing, of what that day, that marking could bring? Should we expect to see even greater activity around October 7th?
It's hard to know on what the anniversary date itself will bring, other than it is a point of recognition, or it should be, for all involved about how long this has gone on, certainly about what triggered the actions in Gaza, the horrific attack on Israel on October 7th. It is a reminder of just how long the hostages have been enduring, hostages who are still alive, have been enduring what they are enduring under Hamas's control of them in the tunnels and other places in Gaza. So all of that is very difficult, for sure, and further should increase the interest of all involved in getting to these ceasefire agreements before we reach that anniversary.
Well, certainly. And of course, just less than a month after that anniversary will bring the U.S. election. And I wonder, Mara, the degree to which you think the uncertainty around that as to what kind of administration the United States will be offering in January, what that administration will look like, the kind of policy it's likely to pursue, is actually disincentivizing some progress in these areas, because everybody could wait and see if they end up with a friendlier outcome to their interests.
Yeah, I understand why you're asking the question, and I understand why, from the United States perspective, that would seem to be something others are considering. I'm not sure for those in the region, as they're making day-to-day calculations, that weighs all that heavily. And so I think that we may overestimate how others throughout the world weigh their day-to-day actions. Not to say that who the United States elects in November would not have big consequences for the rest of the world, and most of the world recognizes that. I guess the point I'm making is just for the specific actions with respect to the conflicts we have ongoing there, I'm not sure it's that much of a factor. You can weigh it different ways for a number of the different players.
Well, that's fair enough and understood, Mara. Finally, before we let you go, if we consider what happens if this de-escalation or ceasefire agreement doesn't happen in the immediate term, to what extent would you expect that the U.S. has to get more actively involved? What that U.S. involvement could actually look like, knowing that if we look back to the attacks, Iran attempt to attack Israel, that was largely intercepted with the assistance of the U.S. and other allies. Would you expect that any U.S. involvement would stay that kind of defensive support realm, or could we actually be talking American troops on the ground, in the air, on the water?
So there's already been an increase in American troops to the region, I think probably primarily to help with evacuation and to shore up regional stability. I think that's happened just in the last week or so. And I think it's important to keep in mind that for the broader overall U.S. national security interest, Iran is a real concern, and Iran's behaviors are a real concern. And part of trying to resolve the immediate issues between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah, that the United States shares that interest with other key players in the region to be able to shore up an overall strategy and approach with respect to Iran for the region, which is part of the importance of getting as well to getting us back on a two-state pathway for a Palestinian and Israeli state. All of that is part and parcel of being able to deal with and address the Iranian concern, which remains at the forefront for the United States.